Hello, this is John Greiner with Basin Safety. Excited to be here with you this month, November 2020. We're going to be covering a couple topics: defensive driving, awareness training, and cold weather work and safety. We're also going to be discussing a little bit about cold weather injuries, how to prevent those injuries, and how to take care of people from a first aid perspective if somebody gets an injury. So this is a little bit of a longer month, a lot of topics, a lot of information here to cover. Hopefully it's going to give you the skills you need to prepare yourself as well as manage any sort of emergencies that arise in the field due to any sort of automobile crash or cold weather work issue. So we're going to go ahead and start with defensive driving awareness training. I just want to point out right away in this picture that if you are letting your children drive your vehicles, that is very dangerous. This kid is a terrible driver. You can tell he's not looking at the road, can't even see over the dashboard. I think this is some sort of Humvee. Definitely should not be driving a Humvee, just so we're all on the same page there. Want to make sure no one's letting their children drive their Humvees. No, actually, family is one of the major reasons for us to be safe on the road. During work, a lot of us aren't driving with our families, hopefully. But there are a lot of people that are getting out and about, especially in the cold weather season for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for New Year's. And we'll look at some statistics later on in the presentation here that kind of show when those incidents happen. And we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves as well as other people on the road at all times. So our goal is to provide information and skills to perform tasks involving driving safely, efficiently, and with minimal risk to yourself and others. That's kind of the main goal here, is obviously protecting yourself and other people. We're also going to be talking about some regulations, statistics, and corporate requirements for your companies, making sure that you don't drive distracted, etc. So defensive driving, as defined by the National Safety Council, is driving to save lives, time, and money in spite of surrounding conditions and the actions of others. Maybe something you want to pay attention to for the quiz a little bit later. And that's, everybody, myself included, has moments of road rage, of issues on the road, of being frustrated with others, or the conditions, construction specifically, where you're just kind of tired, you're fed up with it, you want to get to where you're going, you have a job to do, and we don't always account for the things on the road. And that's one of the big things we need to do is before you set out, especially if you're going an hour or longer, just anticipate there being issues on the road, it taking longer. And a good way to prevent that is by leaving earlier than you think you may need to, especially when road conditions or construction may slow you down. So it does obviously save lives. Without skills and experience to avoid preventable collisions, accidents happen, and about 2/3 of all collisions are preventable. I may even say it's a little bit higher, but statistically that's the reality. So saving your own life is a big thing, and the techniques we're going to be talking about are simple, easily learned. They definitely focus heavily on knowledge, foresight, alertness, judgment, and skill, as well as patience, cooperation, and courtesy, and not having a me versus them attitude. That's extremely important when you're out there on the road. So drivers that exemplify good habits, they have knowledge, foresight of what could potentially happen, alertness, judgment, and skills. And if you've ever had to train a driver, especially a young driver out there, how to drive, you recognize the lack of experience very quickly and how that can make them stressed, make them frustrated, or make them kind of push them to make bad decisions or not the right decision. And that's why it's important, obviously, to have somebody there training you. And then as you get older and you get more experienced, you start to know that, hey, if somebody cuts me off, rather than riding up on them, it's better just kind of tail back and maybe give them a little bit of a dirty look when you drive by. No, I'm just joking about that. But you know that you don't need to win every battle on the road, and there really isn't any battles on the road. And defensive driving, really, the mentality here isn't to be an afraid driver at all, but it's to maintain your integrity and your safety on the road, regardless of what other people are doing. So patience, cooperation, and courtesy on the road, once again, not a me versus them attitude. So defensive driving saves time, but not necessarily on the road itself. Honestly, if you leave a little bit earlier and are a little bit more cautious and give other people the right of way, that may extend the length of your journey. However, obviously, if there's an accident or if you get pulled over, as many of us have before, you know that getting pulled over definitely does not get you there faster. So obviously, time from grieving, away from work and recovery, etc. So automobile crashes are definitely expensive. There's a multi-billion-dollar automobile insurance industry for this reason, because injuries happen, hospital bills happen, collision repair and maintenance repair issues happen. And so, part of this too is taking care of the vehicle that you're driving. We've got about 10, 15 trucks on the road every day, and we can tell the difference between people who are taking care of the vehicles and people who are not taking care of the vehicles. So obviously, in my experience, people who don't take care of the vehicles, it just costs a lot more to keep those individuals on the road. As far as attitude goes, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that you choose. You have to make a conscious decision to choose to be a safe driver. It doesn't just naturally happen. No one gets cut off or sees someone driving insanely and is thrilled by that or calmed by it. In fact, it naturally makes us upset, and that's where we have to kind of choose to have a good attitude about people on the road and other people driving inconsiderately or driving unsafely. And your attitude, if you get stressed, you get frustrated, you get angry, is going to quickly turn into bad driving habits. Road rage, as many of us have felt at one time or another, myself included, is driving under the influence of too much anger, abrupt anger, or constant anger. And, you can see nice little old ladies get behind the wheel of a car and just turn into a terror. And, it's not uncommon. In some ways, maybe it's a stress reducer, I don't know. But we definitely don't want to use our time in the vehicle as our therapy for life. So if you are behind the road and you're ticked off and you're angry, you got a long drive ahead of you, probably not the best time to be driving. Take a calm, deep breath and just let it go. So another thing that exacerbates this is feeling in danger by someone else who cuts you off, is tailgating you, swerving in the road, etc. Other things, being forced to slow down, or being upset with someone who's breaking traffic rules. And here we have the term righteous indignation, which definitely categorizes how I feel sometimes when I see people doing that. But really, it's okay to have all those thoughts and feel all those feelings. I'm not telling you how to think or feel, but if you let that control you and you don't, let it go and just calm yourself, you can exacerbate it further and cause a bigger issue. And it's interesting, in the last few years, there's been a lot of just videos, and obviously with YouTube and everything blowing things up, but drivers getting out and fighting each other, people shooting each other on the road. In Detroit a couple years ago, someone was prosecuted for someone was driving in the fast lane, and in Michigan, if you've never driven there, it's people really make use of that fast lane, and someone was just kind of putzing along in that lane. Eventually they got over, and a driver got into the fast lane to the left side and actually shot them and killed them on the road, which is pretty insane. We think, man, that's next level road rage, but letting that kind of stuff frustrate you or over frustrate you really isn't in anyone's I'm not saying anyone here is going to shoot somebody for driving too slow in the fast lane, but it's not going to really benefit anybody, especially yourself. So 5 major factors that influence the driving performance. We have maturity level, people's attention and alertness, their knowledge base, as I mentioned earlier, just not having the experience, driving habits, some things we do without even thinking about it. And if you really think back over a journey, the different things that you do, how many times did you look at your phone? How many times did you adjust the radio, reach down for something, cleaning the dash on your car, whatever it is. These sorts of habits over time consistently can add up cumulatively to an incident or an accident. And then lastly, and I've already kind of went over this pretty thoroughly, our emotions and our attitudes. So physical aspects, we've all experienced this as well: fatigue, illness, age, either young or old, without experience or just not fully alert. Stress can definitely cause issues, and then physical disabilities can when they look at all the accidents that have happened and they kind of do a root cause analysis, that's another issue that they find. So major and common driving errors are obviously failure to obey traffic laws, not following the speed limit, running stop signs, driving under the influence of alcohol or other substances. Failure to maintain a vehicle is another issue, and this is typically with people who don't know a lot about cars. They don't keep it in good conditions. The tires are running bald. Whether it's the engine oil hasn't been changed, which can cause the vehicle to break down, etc. Discourtesy to other drivers or combativeness, like, hey, I didn't make the high school football team, so, I'm going to take it out on everybody until I'm, 57 years old. Lack of driving knowledge, just once again, not knowing what to do in certain scenarios, and then bad judgment and poor decision making. And, whenever I read that, I think of, people who have died or been seriously injured from like swerving to avoid squirrels or rabbits. And you're thinking, what were you thinking, man? I love animals probably as much as the next guy, but definitely not enough to put my life in danger to save a squirrel. But, people in those instances not having the foresight to think, hey, what do I do if something jumps in front of me? Do I swerve maniacally in order to avoid it at 70 miles per hour? Or do I just, say, hey, sorry, buddy, wrong place, wrong time? So who has the right of way out there when you're driving? And there's this, it's a little bit unclear, or everybody's not quite sure. The best answer to this question, and I know it's not easy, is they do. They have the right of way. If it's unclear, uncertain, wave them through. Around roundabouts, etc. It's unclear, it's unsure. Just go ahead and let them in if they feel like they really need to get in there. And this is really where kind of like stepping up and being the better person on the road. It's a good place to practice that, and hopefully for some of us it bleeds over into our regular normal life. But really, it's a good place to practice selflessness and saying, hey, these people have the right of way. So right of way at intersections, obviously there are times when a driver must yield to the right of way, and knowledge of this is important. Sometimes, as we all know, four-way stops can be a point of frustration for me where, Billy obviously stopped before me, but he's waving me on, and I'm like, why? Like, does your car not work? What do you, just follow the rules, There's a little bit of road rage coming out there on me. Hopefully I didn't come through too harsh there. It's easy to get frustrated. So obviously the person in a four-way stop, just to make this clear, if somebody to the right of you stops first, they go first. If someone across you stops first, they go first. If someone to the left of you stops first, they go first. If you arrive at the same time, that's when, it depends on, who's to the right of whom. And the reason for that is, statistically, that person is not going to be in your way unless they're taking a left turn. And that's what you don't know at that moment. And that's why you want to give them the right of way so that, you don't hit them is kind of the major goal there. So when stopping, this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. If you stop behind a car and they stop at the stop sign, that doesn't mean that, I already accomplished my stop. You actually need to stop at the line, at the red line or the white line, depending on the city you're in. And that's the place that you actually stop before engaging on your way. At railroad crossings, these signs are called crossbucks. You see them. There's different, situations you're going to see depending on where you're at. And rail accidents, believe it or not, they still happen. Last year, there was a fatality in Montana near Culbertson. A vehicle drove across the train tracks, and I believe they stopped, and they were hit by a train. There's deep culverts around a train and deep ditches around railroad crossings typically, so definitely be careful on the ice, etc. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this indicates, hey, this is a yield sign. It's not a stop sign unless you're a vehicle that's required to stop at a railroad sign. So if the red lights are flashing and the gates are up, you stop first, then proceed with caution, which can happen from time to time if there are gates. If the gates are down with no train in sight, you can't go around the gates. It's not like, well, hey, this thing's broken, I need to go around it. There's typically a phone number on the box you can call. I mean, that's typically that doesn't happen, but there is a phone number there you can call. And at a non-gated crossing, you must stop at least 15 feet from the rail closest to you if a train's coming. I mean, if there's no train, then go ahead and pass on through. But once again, treat it as a yield sign. You definitely want to look down the rail as far as you can, not just in your immediate area and say, hey, there's no train right here, because rail accidents still happen, believe it or not. Some people ask why they don't just put railroad crossings everywhere. I'm not going to get into the financial reasons, but it does cost a lot of money, and actually they do make a lot of money when there's accidents. It's something insane, like $1 million a day or something, billed to the insurance company. So I'm not saying that's the reason why, but they, for whatever reason financially, they don't put them up. So moving into buckle safety, obviously the law requires for people in a vehicle to be buckled up at all time. If you're under 4 years old, you need to be essentially in a car seat and restrained by a seat belt. 4 to 17 years old need to also be using a seat belt, and no person younger than 18 may ride in the open bed of a vehicle or trailer unless it's the only vehicle owned. That's a little bit state by state. Just don't put your kids in the back of it. I mean, if you're on a farm somewhere and you're moving from field to pasture, okay, probably fine, but definitely on the road, don't be putting kids in the bed of a pickup truck. All right, let's just all kind of agree to that. So crash data does show a direct correlation between seatbelt use and severity injury. And not to say that if you're in a seatbelt you can't get hurt or you can't die. Both of these things can happen, but statistically, unbelted vehicle occupants and crashes in North Dakota account for the largest percent of fatalities and serious injuries, while belted occupants most commonly receive non-serious or no injuries at all. So over the past 5 years, it's a little bit dated statistics here. Nearly 6 out of every 10 people killed in a motor vehicle crash were not wearing a seatbelt at the time of the crash, and 80% of the unbelted fatalities were males. So a lot of times, guys that are listening to this and watching this, you are the typical people that aren't So this is another pet peeve of mine. Definitely had a couple experiences of road rage around this area, is when people don't stop for sirens and klaxons. You see a siren or a klaxon, pull over the side of the road. Don't, try to make your turn or get ahead in the line or whatever. I mean, if you see it, it's definitely a part of the law. So you want to give them a safe area to pass. You want to give them a clear road so they don't have to worry about potentially hitting somebody. And on 2-lane highways especially, this is, even if they're coming at you, you still want to pull over. Give them as much road as possible. Some people do it on 4 lanes, not necessarily required if they're coming in the opposite direction, but who knows? Maybe they need to, come across the road where you're at, and it's better just to slow down and stop, get over, get out of the way safely so that they can pass. So school buses, when the warning lights are activated, this means the bus is preparing to unload. You definitely want to reduce to 25 miles per hour, which is kind of the standard school zone speed, and then prepare to stop. Be looking for a reason to stop. If maybe the guy left the lights on or whatever, slowly crawl by, but definitely be prepared to stop. If the red lights are flashing, the stop sign is out. This is an indication to stop, whether you're coming behind the bus or towards the bus. Either case, you stop. Watch out for the kids. Prepare to let them pass by, and if you gotta stay a couple minutes, once again, if you're practicing leaving a place early, then it's not such an issue. So definitely kids are going to be in the street if you see that stop sign. So in inclement weather, fog, snow, rain, wind, rain and darkness, there's a few tips and tricks that I want to, well, tricks is the wrong word, but a few tips I want to, there's no real hacks for driving in inclement weather, but a few things you can do to protect yourself and other people. So hydroplaning happens obviously when there's ice or rain on the water. And essentially it's when the vehicle doesn't have traction because it's using the water as its surface to travel on. So under or overinflated tires can cause this. Excessive speed, typically the culprit. Depth of water on the road and lack of tread depth on your tires. So if you know your tires are kind of near in the end of life, and you're trying to hold on a little while, and there's a heavy rainstorm, you definitely want to be prepared that you're going to hydroplane. The way to prevent this is to slow down. You want that vehicle, the weight of your vehicle, not to be in an inertia state, but more to be in a static state, which is going to hold you to the ground better. But the faster you go, just like in a boat, the more speed and frequency on that water you're going to get. Driving at night, more dangerous than driving during the day. There's not a lot of night driver training, but there are a few different tips and tricks. So one thing is, obviously, wearing some sort of headlights, or eyewear that blocks out the headlights, which can help, especially if you get night blindness. There's different, they're like blue blockers essentially, and you can still see at night, and they also illuminate a little bit better as well. So things to remember about driving at night: your headlights are only going to illuminate a certain portion of the road. The speed you travel is going to eliminate reaction times, and things are going to not get into your vision until much later. You'll see them, not a mile down the road, but literally a few 100 feet down the road. Your peripheral vision is hindered, and then obviously, typically we're going to get more tired when we're sleepy. There's not as much to engage us, and obviously driving while tired is a serious issue. So another encouraging or thing I encourage people to do is just slow down when driving at night. In fact, Montana, if you travel a lot over there, you'll note that they have a nighttime driving speed limit, and that's essentially because they know that more fatal accidents happen at nighttime. So backing, typically not fatal accidents unless someone's behind you standing there, but most accidents happen while backing. So trusting your rear and side mirrors, there's blind spots, not always a great idea. Even backup cameras, sometimes you can get so fixated in that backup camera that you're not looking to the sides and things that you could hit there. Before you get in the cab, great idea to do a quick walk around to ensure nothing's in your path. Just look around. Hey, I'm a little bit closer to that than I thought I was, or there's something behind my vehicle that wasn't there before. Back slowly, and then be careful of small children who may wander behind your car or truck, mostly in town. If you're on an oil site and there's kids walking around your pickup truck, there's probably a more serious issue there. But then also always park so your first move is forward. So backing in, all the major corporations that have large fleets of trucks, there's a reason that they always back in, because most accidents happen while backing. Something gets in your path, you can't get out as quickly. If there's an emergency, you got to back up and 3-point turn yourself before you get out versus just driving straight away. So always park so your first move is forward. Physical forces that influence driver control, just to get in some physics here. 30 miles per hour and 3,000 pound small car, you need 78 feet to stop. At 6,000 pounds, so a pickup truck, you need almost double that to stop. When the weight doubles, the stopping distance doubles. So at 60 miles per hour, you need about 303 feet to stop. When your speed doubles, it's about 4 times the stopping distance as 30 miles per hour. So, just know that as your speed doubles, the distance you need to stop quadruples, and then the weight of your vehicle, as it gets larger, the stopping distance you need doubles. So, if you got a vehicle that's loaded, you've experienced this, it takes longer to stop. It's just straight physics. And obviously better braking mechanisms, air brakes, etc. These can help that process, but inertia is inertia, and you can't fight it. So how to calculate the stopping distance of your vehicle at a speed of 60 miles per hour. It takes the average person 1.5 seconds to recognize an object on the road. And at 60 miles per hour in 1.5 seconds, you'll travel 132 feet before the brakes are applied. So, just think about that. That's about 40 yards, which is a pretty good distance before you even start pushing the brakes. And then once again, how long you take to stop depends on the weight of your vehicle and how good your brake system is. So getting into North Dakota statistics, they do a great job putting this online. If you're interested, there's a lot more on there. I kind of did a brief review here, but kind of going over the last decade. So in 2009, we had 17,000 crashes. and which has actually gone down now, but for a while there it peaked up significantly, as you can see in the graph down there. And now that 2018, I think 2019 was a little bit lower as well. We're down to about 15,000 crashes, so and 105 fatalities in 2018. So just note that the fatalities are a factor of how many accidents there are. So when you had 18,000 fatalities in 12 and 13, you had 170 and 148 fatalities, so a lot. And same thing in 2011. Once we get down there to the 17,000, 15,000s, you see them closer to about 100. So, those two things do correlate very clearly. So in the nation, there's 33,000 fatalities a year, and 100 of those are in North Dakota to 2018. So North Dakota vehicle fatalities by month in 2018. So if you look in the winter months, January, February, December, November, there are actually not as many typically in the winter months. You'd think there'd be more, but people are driving a little bit more carefully. The majority of the fatalities are June through October, and then they start to go down there in 18 anyway. But over the last decade, you can see once again, August, July, September, October, and June, and even into May are kind of our higher months. November's up a little bit high, December's up a little bit high, January's typically a lot lower, and February is a lot lower. And by that time, people have gotten kind of more experienced at, driving in the winter. Our speeds are slower, etc. So, definitely, we've kind of made it past the hump, if you will, for risk. But still November, a lot of fatalities. In December, a lot of fatalities. So, these are real people, and when we see these numbers, everyone says they don't want to be a statistic, but obviously here we don't want to be too. Just note that there are still a lot of people dying on a consistent basis from driving unsafely and not wearing their seatbelt. So how do we rank nationally? Like I said, in 2018, we had, 105 fatalities, fatality rate 1.06 in North Dakota, and U.S. fatality rate 1.14. So, we're a little bit below average there. We have been above it, though. In 2014, we were 1.2 to 1.8. 2013, 1.4 to 1.1. 2012, 1.7 to 1.1. So, we've definitely done a lot in the last, 5 years to bring those numbers down statistically, but still quite a few. So how do we rank nationally? Like I said, in 2018, we had, 105 fatalities, fatality rate 1.06 in North Dakota, and U.S. fatality rate 1.14. So, we're a little bit below average there. We have been above it, though. In 2014, we were 1.2 to 1.8. 2013, 1.4 to 1.1. 2012, 1.7 to 1.1. So, we've definitely done a lot in the last, 5 years to bring those numbers down statistically, but still quite a few. So how do we rank nationally? Like I said, in 2018, we had, 105 fatalities, fatality rate 1.06 in North Dakota, and U.S. fatality rate 1.14. So, we're a little bit below average there. We have been above it, though. In 2014, we were 1.2 to 1.8. 2013, 1.4 to 1.1. 2012, 1.7 to 1.1. So, we've definitely done a lot in the last, 5 years to bring those numbers down statistically, but still quite a few. I went over that a little bit. So we're going to talk about effects on traction. So friction is obviously... we're relying on the tire tread to have friction against the road to stop us. So the condition of the brakes, tires, the road surface, and speed all kind of come in to affect the friction of our vehicle on the road. On traction, which is a little bit different, that's obviously having control, that friction actually being strong enough to hold, is felt when centrifugal force is felt when your car is being pushed away from the center of a curve when driving around a turn or corner. A lot of accidents around curves out there, and you'll see it sometimes where, at the end of a curve, you've got like a road barrier there to protect. Typically, they don't put those out preemptively. They put them out after so many vehicles have crashed off of the road. Hydroplaning is another one. I kind of talked about that a little bit already. Something that we experience on the road. That's when your vehicle uses the water as a surface, and then you have no traction. You have no friction because tires on water have no control. So obviously, lower speed prevents that from occurring. So once again, friction is the gripping power. Traction is affected, essentially affected in one way or another by friction, stopping distance, centrifugal force, or hydroplaning. And whenever you decrease the traction of your vehicle on the road, you increase the likelihood of an accident. In the wintertime, what can happen as well, which we should talk about, slippery surfaces, etc. Oil. When you see like a light snow falling, especially right at the beginning of the winter, and you see this kind of like these two black lines that kind of surface on the road, that's actually the oil that's on the road coming to the surface on top of that snow or frost. And that's essentially going to be the most slick area on the road, but typically people drive right in it, and it looks safer because it's like, oh, here's the dry spot. That is not the dry spot. The road is completely covered. I promise you, it's not just missing those areas, but that's actually oil and grease and tar, which can decrease friction, especially if there's ice on the road. So kinetic energy, centrifugal force, inertia, and gravity. Kinetic is you moving. Centrifugal force is you staying, on the center of the road. Inertia is the movement of you moving forward, and then trying to stop. That's your inertia. And then gravity, obviously, is another big player in this, which you can reduce the amount of gravity you're experiencing by speed. So inertia, as I mentioned, the force or factor that makes objects remain in place or remain in motion. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. The faster it travels, the more difficult it's going to be to stop that kinetic energy and your inertia. So those two kind of work together. Gravity is obviously what pulls you towards the Earth itself. And then for those reasons, essentially there's a simple tip here to prevent the likelihood of inertia, gravity, all these things affecting you getting in an accident. So we've all heard of the 2-second rule, which is like if you're driving and there's a vehicle in front of you on the roadway, what's the safe distance between them? And typically the safe distance is you see them pass a mile marker, telephone pole, and you're going to count 1/1000, 2/1000. And that's, going to give you essentially a good stopping distance in between you and them. That's in dry, perfect road conditions. Once we, get into wet weather, we want to double that to 4 seconds. If there's snow on the ground, we want to double it to 6 seconds. And if there's ice on the ground, we want to double it to 8. Increase that by another factor of 2 to 8 seconds. So if there's ice on the road, you should not be traveling as close to a vehicle as you do when it's dry. Just plain and simple. That's not a good idea. You want to be much further behind them so that you give yourself ample time to stop, and stop slowly. If you slam on the brakes when it's icy, you're going to skid out of control. And then if someone's coming head on, you're going to have, either head on in a 2-lane or head on in a 4-lane. You definitely can cross that barrier and go into the other lane or under the way of traffic. So if you haven't driven a road before, typically we're going to naturally drive slower depending on what kind of driver you are. I have a good friend I drive with a lot, and she just knew it doesn't matter. We were driving through South Dakota the other day. She'd never been to South Dakota, and she's driving like she grew up on this road. The speed limit's 70. She's going a little bit over 70. I'm like, what are you doing? You don't know this road, and we're in the mountains. So some people just have that mentality. So definitely if you're the passenger, hold your drivers accountable to travel the speed limit or below if necessary. At Basin Safety, we have a permanent 5 miles per hour under speed limit regulation. So you cannot drive the speed limit. It's not acceptable. You have to be 5 miles under, because things happen. You end up going a little bit faster, you're going down a hill, whatever, you're going to hit that speed limit. But as a rule, we're 5 miles per hour under. So if you have a longer hood, you're going to travel a little bit further, because we're going to travel closer to the vehicle depending on how much we see of the road. And so you just keep that timeline and distance in mind, and then kind of have that be your internal mental buffer for distance between you and the vehicle in front of you. It's a great idea. So once again, kind of wrapping it all up: failure to obey the law, failure to maintain your vehicle, discourtesy to other drivers, combativeness, lack of driving knowledge, and bad judgment and poor decision making. These kind of all culminate into root factors of a lot of automobile accidents and fatalities. So interacting with pedestrians on the road, obviously they have the right of way. Some people don't have this mentality. They're like, you're walking, you're in dumb area, I'm going to make you pay for it. No, just let them go, give them a little wave. Not with the middle finger, but just, let them just yield to them. Sharing the roads with trucks. Obviously, if you are a truck driver, you know the importance of this, but definitely don't get into their, I think they call it the no zone in driver training these days. Essentially, they're blind spots. You don't want to be there for very long. So as much as possible, avoid those blind spots. Trucks are bigger, so plan and start your pass earlier if you have to. Give the truck as much distance as possible. Once you get in front of them, don't cut them off. Don't make them slam on their brakes. If a truck's getting out of the way, take the ditch. Get it, or the shoulder. Get out of their way because they have a lot of weight behind them typically. Cyclists are required to obey, obviously, other traffic laws. They don't always, slow down when you're passing bicyclists, especially if you have a bigger vehicle. You're the wind created by your vehicle, or the air gusts when you're driving past them, can cause issues and cause them to crash. So definitely give them a little bit of space. For motorcyclists, they're also required the same rules, obviously. Signal and execute your maneuvers earlier when you're around motorcyclists. Definitely increase your following distance and be very careful at intersections. Motorcycles can typically stop a little bit faster. Not that it's safer because they're lighter. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like, hey, if this person slams on the brakes and they have to stop for a lot more things than a car does, a motorcycle may need to get out of the way of a rabbit just for safety. So, smaller things can impact their ability to travel safely. So keep that in mind. So if someone is coming up behind you and there's a threat of a rear end collision, so I make a habit, if I have to stop faster than normal, especially for whatever reason, I'm always looking at my rear view mirror. And there's been probably half a dozen times where I've stopped completely and then pulled over because there's a car coming up way too fast behind me. So obviously give them a little bit more traffic distance if you have to. You do not want to be on the brakes when you're hit. You want to potentially, put it in even in neutral, but definitely release the brake at the instance before hit, because that, rather than force completely coming into your vehicle, it's going to propel you forward, rather than your vehicle trying to hold you back. So, and that's also going to prevent you from skidding out very hard as well. So, always when you're stopping, or especially when stopping fast, take a look in that rear view mirror. Make sure nothing's coming up behind you too fast. All right, so if you're in the winter, and which we will be very soon and kind of already have been, if you get into a slide, what's happening is one of your vehicles has lost traction with the road, and it's either spinning or locked up or whatever. And it's whenever a tire or a part of your car doesn't have traction, and it's weighted on that, it's going to want to move to the front of the vehicle. So especially if it's a rear tire, that's a problem. That's why rear-wheel drive vehicles are so dangerous. So if it's front wheel, it's already at the front, so it's a little bit better. But once you start skidding, if the tail end of your vehicle is swinging to the right side, you want to turn your wheel into that or to the right side. Essentially, you're balancing out that skid, and you're preventing that tire from moving the way that it wants to, because you're counteracting its swing to the front of the road. The same thing to the left. You're skidding to the left. You want to turn into that, so you're counteracting that tire's ability to swing to the front of the vehicle. So don't slam on the brakes. Don't pump the brakes. Let off the gas for sure to reduce your speed, because that will increase the lack of traction if you are continuing to give it gas. So if you have a flat tire blowout or loss of a tire, the best thing you to do is hold it as steady as possible and slowly, let off the gas and slowly kind of maneuver to the shoulder of the road, once you have control. So steer straight until you're in control, and then pull off the right of the way to safely stop. If your vehicle breaks down, once again, get over the side of the road. We're going to talk about what to do in the winter here in a little bit when we get into cold weather safety. But turn on the flashers, raise the hood when safe, turn on the car's dome light, let people know you're there. If you have road flares, maybe not necessary, but triangles, etc., you want to get as far away from the roadway as you can, and then be prepared, especially in winter months. So speaking of winter months, cold weather work and winter preparedness, we want to talk about this. Obviously, working in the cold makes life more difficult. If you have to work in the cold, pumps don't work, things fail, they freeze up, you need methanol, etc. So these are some things that we want to talk about. So we want to talk about cold weather terminology, some precautions, cold weather injuries, what they look like, how to prevent them, and some different things you don't want to do in the winter. So the cold stress equation, when the body's unable to warm itself, essentially it stays cold. And when you stay cold, your body starts to develop hypothermia. So there's different temperatures where this happens. This is just kind of a ACGIH thing, but essentially, depending on the temperature and the wind speed, that's where we need to be concerned. So, looking down here at about, minus 20, that's where things can seriously happen within like a minute. Minus 30, minus 40, and minus 50, less than 30 seconds, we can experience frostbite. So this is and then wind just increases that. So here's the National Weather Service wind chill chart. I like this a little bit better. It's a little bit clearer. The other one, you're kind of like, how many degrees is that? This one's a lot clearer. So really where we want to start paying attention, at the lowest, at 55 miles per hour, 10 degrees can hit us pretty hard, and that's less than 30 minutes where we're going to experience some sort of frostbite. So even at 10, we may not think it's that cold, especially if you're in North Dakota, but it can be. So even at 30 degrees, at 55 degrees, 55 miles per hour, less than 2 hours. It's going to take a little bit more than 2 hours rather, but still, even at 30 degrees we can have potential injuries. But then as we get into a typical windy day in North Dakota is 20 degrees. 20 to 30 degrees is typical, right? So where we have to really start worrying is right there at about 5 to 0 degrees. When we see that it's a normal winter day, frostbite can occur in less than 30 minutes. Once you start increasing the wind speed, etc., it can get pretty quick. So, it is not uncommon for it to hit, 60 mile per hour winds in North Dakota. It's not crazy, although it doesn't happen often for it to get minus 45. But then we're looking at negative 100 degrees. We're looking, but it doesn't even have to be that. You're less than 5 minutes if it's, negative 30 with a 25 mile per hour wind, which is pretty common actually in North Dakota in the wintertime. So keep that in mind. Keep your skin covered, etc., and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit, if you'll let me. So winter storm outlook, essentially 3 to 5 days before a winter storm. Pay attention to these. Doesn't always happen, but something to kind of pay attention to. Advisories: we have wind chill advisory, winter weather advisory, dense fog advisory, and wind advisory. So 30 miles per hour is when the wind advisory starts. So just know that if we're hearing about a wind issue, it's over 30 miles per hour. Most elevated work is going to stop at that point. So if you're working on a workover rig, etc., you probably shouldn't be working, even if it was a sunny day, at 30 miles per hour. So wind chill advisory is 25 to 39 below zero. That's really where our wind chill issues are going to start to happen, or 25 degrees above to 39 below zero. Winter weather advisories is an issued for a combination of events: snow with freezing rain, sleet or snow and wind with blowing snow, when warning criteria is not expected to be met. So this, typically 3 to 5 inches of snow, etc. Dense fog is when a widespread fog is going to reduce visibility to a quarter mile or less. Now, once again, if you're traveling at 60 miles per hour, you see something in the road, it's going to take you 130 feet to start applying the brakes. And if you remember before that, it's going to take you another 300 feet if you're a truck to stop. So we're looking at 500 feet. A quarter mile is 800 feet. So if you were to see something at the end of your visibility and slam on the brakes immediately, you may not stop before you hit it. So and especially if there's any ice, etc., on the road. So dense fog advisory, definitely keep that in mind. So winter storm watch affects the ability's possibility, or essentially alerts us of a possibility of heavy snow, a blizzard, heavy freeze, basically serious winter issues. And then once we get into warnings, that's when we know it's happening, like it's coming. Heavy ice accumulations of a quarter inch or more. Obviously, extreme dangerous and damaging situations, icy roads, down tree limbs, power lines. You do not want to be around when a power line goes down. Winter storm warning issued when a combination of heavy snow, heavy freezing rain, or sleet is expected to occur. They typically are issued 12 to 36 hours before the event, but not always. And 6 inches or more of snow in 12 hours or less, or 8 inches in 24 hours or less, is going to be a winter storm warning. Don't worry. Not going to put this on the test. I'm going to share a link under the video here. There's actually a really good a bit of material that Dan Griffin with Nesset Consulting shared with me. It's a Pembina County road and winter safety awareness packet. Highly recommend it, and that's where I got a lot of the information for this. Warnings: blizzard warning issued for sustained or gusty winds of 35 miles per hour or more with falling or blowing snow, and it's going to last for at least 3 hours. And then wind chill warning, once again, issued for wind chills of 40 below zero or colder. But as we saw on that wind chill chart, it doesn't have to be that cold for that to occur. All right, so another good tool out there is the North Dakota Road Map app. So you can do this online or you can download the app. And it's going to give us road conditions, if they're closed or blocked. You can look at cameras around the county, around the state, kind of look, hey, I'm going to be driving over here. Let me click on this camera here, and it'll show you the road conditions where you're going. If you see high drifts of snow, be like, maybe I don't want to travel that way today. So it's a really good tool for just knowing what conditions you're going to be exposed to when you're getting out there on the road. You can plan your route by it, and then just check to see if you want to send your guys out into the field that day as well. So the next few slides, we're going to be covering winter preparedness at home and in your vehicle, kind of the main areas we're going to be when there's issues. So at home, you want to have a good kit of materials and supplies, first aid kits, some extra food, medicine, water, batteries, a radio that's either solar powered or hand crank power, some extra heating fuel, and an emergency heating source such as a propane heater, fireplace, etc. I want to make sure you have extra food for your pets. Water, shelter, basically everything they're going to need as well. In your vehicle, really recommend a storm survival kit. We sell these at our store. They have them, online. You can find them around town. Wherever you need to get one, doesn't matter, but definitely make sure you pack one. Also recommend a shovel to dig yourself out if you get stuck, but having maps in there in case your cell phone dies, have an extra charger, maybe a solar powered one, some high calorie food, candles, emergency blankets, some flares potentially, tow rope or chain, jumper cables, gas line de-icer. Essentially, you just want to think like, hey, if I was stuck in this truck or this car for 36 hours, which is typically how long a long winter storm takes, would I have enough to stay warm and stay alive? Definitely, you don't want to leave your vehicle, and we'll go over that in a little bit. So preparing your vehicle from a maintenance perspective, you want to make sure your antifreeze levels are in good shape. Low antifreeze levels will freeze up your lines and kind of hurt your engine and potentially cause you to break down. You want to make sure your battery's fully charged and good to go. It's not kind of on its last leg. Make sure your brakes are working well, your exhaust system is working well, there's no leaks, etc. Want to make sure your air filters are clear and your fuel line is clean. Any water in your vehicle can cause problems. And definitely want to make sure that you always have at least half a tank of gas during the winter season. Once again, if you get stranded, you don't want to be out of gas. Also, heater and defroster, make sure they're working properly, and lights and hazard lights, specifically hazard lights as well. You want to go ahead and ensure that those are working properly. Want to make sure oil level's correct and the weight's right for winter months. Obviously, you want to change that during winter if your vehicle needs that. Make sure your thermostat's working properly. You have enough de-icing windshield wiper fluid. It's really good, and it's not a bad idea to look into getting good winter tires. We're going to have better studs for dealing with ice, etc., and keep your traction a lot better. For your house, I don't want to forget that. Once again, kind of mentioned it earlier, make sure you got enough equipment. Eyeglasses, kind of a weird thing, but make sure that, you've got enough if you got to stay inside for a long time. Paper plates, napkins, paper towels, sanitation, personal hygiene items. There's kits you can get to heat water in case your water heater goes down. You just put it in a bucket of water and heat it up. Not a bad idea. All right, so if you are stranded inside or outside or inside of a vehicle, I'm going to give you a few different tips and tricks here. So if you're stranded outside, obviously the first thing you want to do is find shelter. Try to stay dry and always cover all your exposed body parts. And that windshield chart that I showed you a little bit earlier, really that frostbite's going to occur on any skin that's exposed. So making sure you have underlayers, gloves, etc., protect exposed skin. If there's no shelter available, you want to look at building a lean-to, and that's why it's a good idea to have a tarp in your vehicle as well, or a large blanket, a windbreak or snow cave for protections from the wind. That's kind of your biggest danger when it's cold. Build a fire for heat and to attract attention so people can find you. Place rocks around the tire to absorb and reflect the heat, around the fire rather. Melt snow for drinking water, and eating snow will lower your body temperature, which could lead to hypothermia as well. So, you want to make sure that that's warm. If you're stranded in a vehicle, obviously you're going to hunker down and camp out there. You want to run the engine about 10 minutes each hour for heat. You don't want to keep it running all the time because, once again, you don't want to reduce your gas, but you're definitely going to want to keep the area around your exhaust pipe clear so that carbon monoxide doesn't come back through into the vehicle. Also open the window for a little fresh air. Be visible to rescuers. Once again, a fluorescent flag or something of that nature you want to have in there as well. Turn on the dome light when running the engine. Tie a bright colored cloth to your antenna or door. Once again, a flag. If the snow stops falling, raise the hood to indicate you need help. It's not a bad idea. So every once in a while, you're going to want to get out, move arms, legs, fingers, and toes, keep blood circulating to keep warm. And with that and with the emergency survival kit, with food, heat blankets, etc., you should be in good shape. If you're working outside, one of the main things I want to talk about is not using a torch to thaw anything, especially if it has held or could hold hydrocarbons, because a lot of guys out there, on pumps, etc., they freeze up and they're using torches or weed burners to thaw them out. That will cause essentially seals to melt and release gases, etc. So not a good method. Using antifreeze isn't a bad idea, methanol, things of that nature, but you definitely don't want to use heat like that. So you want to plan your work effectively, plan for and take frequent breaks. You definitely want to be eating a lot more and drinking a lot more water when it's cold outside to keep yourself hydrated. And you don't want to be using a lot of caffeine, minimal coffee or energy drinks. Some people say, you can use liquor to keep yourself warm. That may work for a few moments, but it's not going to work long term. So probably don't need a bottle of Jack in your winter survival kit. And you also want to ensure you have the proper PPE for working outside. So winter gloves, thermally insulated boots. You want to dress in layers. Underlayers are not required to be FR, so go ahead and feel free to have some non-FR underwear. But as many layers as you can wear and stay comfortable. Hot hands or other hand or foot warming tools are good. Make sure you have base layers. Water wicking are good so it doesn't hold moisture. Hard hat liners to protect your neck from the wind. A lot of people wear hoodies under their hard hats when it's cold. That's not an acceptable practice. You can get hard hat liners. You want to make sure you have those. And also ensure heaters that you're using are intrinsically safe or designed with tip-over protection if they don't need to be intrinsically safe so you don't start fires. All right, so getting into injuries a little bit and factors increasing risk of cold injuries and illnesses. If you've had a previous cold-related injury, you're at higher risk. Predisposing health conditions, fatigue, poor physical condition, not enough nutrition, dehydration, certain types of medication, alcohol and caffeine are big ones, nicotine even, age, improper clothing and equipment, underactivity or overactivity, and obviously cold conditions, low temperature, high wind, moisture, and long-term exposure. These are kind of the bigger ones that are that's why it's important to plan and take those breaks. Preventing cold-related injuries and illnesses, how do we prevent them from happening? Once again, wear appropriate clothing. Avoid wetness or excessive sweating unless you have wicking layers. Stay dry, keep active. Take frequent breaks in warm, shielded areas from the wind especially. Work in pairs so you can keep an eye on each other. Consume warm, high-calorie food as often as possible. I mean, guys back in the day, I'm thinking of Lewis and Clark and their crew when they came through North Dakota when they first explored this area. Those guys would eat like 10,000 calories a day while they were working outside, so just kind of keep that in mind. Hypothermia sets in when our body is unable to maintain a 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. And, you can get cold and then warm back up and cold, warm back up. But once that system breaks or is broken, that's when your hypothermia is going to set in. And depending on how cold and for how long is going to determine how serious of an injury it becomes. So the hypothalamus is really what's affected. And you may not know it's happening to you. You may think that you're just shivering can stop because your body's like, hey, this isn't working. I'm gonna stop doing it. So you also want coworkers around to help you identify that issue. So most cases of hypothermia occur in air temperatures from 30 degrees to 40 degrees, believe it or not. Within that range, we're in North Dakota, a lot of guys are outside in t-shirts. Like, yeah, this is nice. However, it can occur as high as 65 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how long you're exposed to that temperature. So generally in cold, dry environments, hypothermia occurs over a period of hours. In cold water, obviously, it can happen very quickly. We tend to think hypothermia in terms of being in the water, but it can absolutely happen outside the water. So that's what we call immersion hypothermia. And this is kind of a quick chart just to show you how quickly it can happen. So at 32.5 degrees, you're talking under 15 minutes, you're going to get exhaustion or unconsciousness, and expected time of survival is really not great, 15 to 45 minutes. So kind of getting water temperature, even up to 80 degrees, you can be there for a long time, but 70 to 80, 2 to 12 hours exhaustion or unconsciousness, and expected time of survival, 3 hours to indefinite. Once again, depends on the individual, previous injuries, medications, age, etc. But then even in that 40 to 50 degree range, 30 to 60 minutes before you become unconscious, and really only 3 hours of survival time. So, if you're out there on the water for whatever reason, kind of be aware of that. Stages of hypothermia. We start with mild, then we go to moderate and severe. And that's really has a lot to do with core body temperature. So 98 to 95 degrees is where we're going to start to hit mild hypothermia, 95 to 90 moderate, and then below 90 where it's severe in a severe situation. So the signs of that, mild hypothermia, will start there. Shivering, you're going to start getting shivering, sensations of cold and pain in extremities, pale, waxy, cold skin, numbness of hands, unable to perform complex tasks, able to walk and talk. You're going to start to get disoriented and irritable as well. So if shivering can be stopped voluntarily, you're typically in mild hypothermia there. Possible death from hypothermia is when we get in that serious level, and that's when we're below 90 degrees, typically 82 to 78. So erratic, shallow breathing, may not be able to feel pulse, pupils dilated and fixed, cold blue skin, unresponsive to stimuli, pulmonary edema, meaning your lungs are filling with fluid, cardiac and respiratory failure, and death. So what's happening is our brain's slowing down, our hypothalamus is becoming inactive, and we start to go unconscious, our mind stops working, it's trying to preserve every ounce of energy to the body staying warm. So how to treatment. In mild hypothermic situations, you want to remove wet clothes, move them to a warm environment. Do not exercise to warm them up. You don't want to rewarm them in a warm bath either, or by massaging or rubbing, because they may have frozen extremities especially, and then that can cause some serious issues. So you want to drink warm, sugary drinks, avoid drinks with caffeine, however, and transport victim to emergency facility immediately. Frostbite, a little bit different. Essentially, once again, those ice crystals are going to, and typically hypothermia and frostbite can be together, but essentially this is typically going to happen to your extremity, so all the areas in blue here. So over time, your body will decrease blood flow to conserve warmth to your body, and then the cold will overtake the blood vessels in those extremities and once again turn them to ice. So legs, feet, arms, hands, noses, ears, etc. So it occurs when the deep layers of the skin and other body tissues actually freeze, and that's what's going to happen to the body. So once that happens, it does permanent damage. You'll not be able to feel those extremities anymore. Sometimes they can fall off if they freeze and break. I mean, it's a pretty serious issue. So the causes are exposure to below freezing temperatures for prolonged periods of time. Can occur in above freezing temperatures based on how much wind there is, and we looked at that earlier at the chart. Contact with extremely cold objects, usually metal is kind of one of the worst ones, and contact with cooled or compressed gases. It can happen in that case as well. So there's two different ways to classify frostbite: superficial and deep. The extent of it depends on the extremeness of conditions and how long you're out there. Superficial frostbite includes all layers just of the skin, initially redness, burning, tingling, itching, or cold sensations. Skin turns white, waxy, some resistance, and then there may be even a little bit of blistering. Deep frostbite includes skin, muscle, tendons, nerve, blood vessels, and even the bone can be involved in deep frostbite. White or yellowish waxy skin, turns blue as it thaws, underlying tissues hard, no resistance when pressed. That's not good when it's not spongy anymore. Blood-filled blisters and swelling may develop, and even blood clots, so pretty serious there. So to treat frostbite, if you have it or a buddy has it, you don't want to leave them alone. Give them to a dry, warm area. Remove any wet or tight clothing. You want to get their skin. You've seen people like pressing skin to skin. What's good about that is it kind of gets us to the right temperature, but not too fast. So it's kind of a slow warmth. Do not rub the affected area because rubbing causes damage to the skin and tissue. And essentially, with frostbite, unlike hypothermia, you can put them in a warm bath, about 105 degrees, and monitor the water temperature. You don't want to pour warm water directly on the affected area because it'll warm the tissue too fast and can cause tissue damage as well. So typically it takes about 25 to 40 minutes to treat frostbite effectively. So it may become puffy and blistery. This affected area may have a burning feeling or numbness. When normal feeling, movement, and skin color have returned, it should be dried and wrapped to keep it warm and just kind of unaffected. So it can get cold again, or if it can get cold again, you want to make sure you leave it cold rather than warming it, getting it cold again, because once again, that's going to cause some serious damage. Frost nip is mild formus, or the mildest form of winter injury. Happens to a lot of guys. A lot of us have experienced this. I mean, it occasionally occurs about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. We don't have our ears covered yet. We're like, hey, it's not that cold. You get some wind going. Skin's going to turn a little bit light or white. Top layer of it feels hard, but deeper tissue still feels normal. You're going to be feeling some tingling and numbness. Most of us have experienced this. Happens to our feet a lot. Especially, it can be prevented by wearing warm clothing and footwear. If you do experience frost nip, you just want to gently rewarm the affected area by putting on a heater, putting on a warmer part of the body. Do not use very hot objects such as hot water bottles. Once again, it's going to damage tissue because it's vulnerable at that point. And you don't want to rub the part either. Even small ice crystals in the tissue can cause damage if the skin is rubbed. So we don't want to put compression on it. We just want to warm it up slowly. So an immersion injury or trench foot results from a long exposure to wet or damp, cool conditions. So if that happens for whatever reason, you're walking through the snow, you don't have the right boots, once again, definitely invest in some good winter boots. From 32 to 50 degrees is where this typically occurs. It can occur as high as 60 degrees, and Vietnam, etc., trench foot did occur, and essentially the primary injury is to nerve and muscle tissue. There's no formation of ice crystals, but it can cause permanent damage nonetheless. So symptoms: reddened skin, tingling pain, may cause permanent damage to the circulatory system, and then may develop blisters, ulcers, and gangrene. Serious cases, amputation may be necessary. So treatment of this is obviously getting it dry as soon as possible, warming it slowly at room temperature, carefully cleaning, dry, and wrapping loosely with sterile dressing. Elevate feet to reduce the swelling. You want to reduce the amount of blood flow. Do not walk on that injured foot, and then seek prompt medical attention. It's pretty serious. So prevention of this, keeping feet clean and dry, checking them regularly. If they get wet from water or sweat, dry them, replace with dry socks. Important to have some dry extra socks in your vehicle as well. I got a couple pairs in there at all times. Change socks at least every 8 hours or whenever wet, and apply foot powder with aluminum hydroxide can help. Don't wear tight socks. This can further impair circulation, and don't sleep with wet socks ever. So that pretty much wraps up our training for this month. Really appreciate you paying attention. Once again, the quiz is there. Now, one thing I did want to let you know about as well, some of you guys probably did this, but if you go to our Google page, if you type in Basin Safety and give a review of our training or any experiences you've had with us, or on Facebook, give a review. It highlights your name there. We actually will pick a winner at the end of the month or end of the year here in the next 2 months, and we're giving away a Remington shotgun as well as some black gold FR gear, so hoodie, jeans, hat, etc. So definitely put it out there. We'd like to hear from you, see how we're doing, and really thank you very much for being a part of our training. Have a great month.